What is up, everybody? Sven Diesel here with Sportsman's Warehouse. We're going to be tying up a blinging stone. This is a flashy version of a stonefly using one of my favorite brown flash materials. We're going to use a traditional TMCO size 10 TMC 200R hook for this. We're going to go with a little bit lighter thread in black. This is a UTC 70 denier. You can match it to the color scheme you're going for, of course. And for the bead, we're using a brass bead. This is 1/8 or 3.2 millimeter in a size in color of gold. And we're going to be weighting that down with a .020 lead wire wraps. You could, of course, change some of these, go with a tungsten bead, but for this, I like the lead wraps, adding the bulk on the underbody. We're going to be using some black goose buyouts. I pretty much always tie these buyouts in a darker color. And we're going to be using for the body the medium brown tinsel. This is kind of the flashy material, hence it's called the blinging stone. And we're going to be using some of this Prism SLF. It's a synthetic blend, and it matches the tinsel, and we're going to be going forward with that. And it's going to be kind of a fun project, but I want to make it durable, and so we're going to just put a little thin layer of the Loon UV cement over the back of it just to kind of protect our flash and our body and make it a little bit more durable. So make sure when you get the hook in the vise that it passes the ping test. And we're going to start here with our lead wraps, and it really depends on size and where you're going to be fishing this, on how much weight you want this to have. You could go super heavy for those deep pockets in the quick water. You could lighten it up a little bit, but usually I like my stoneflies to have a little bit of weight, so I'm going to put about 10 to 15 lead wraps there. And then I like to leave my tag end up, and I'll show you a little trick here as we start our thread. We're using, of course, that 70 denier black, and you got to be a little bit mindful of your thread tension. We don't want to break our thread. I'm going to start it right there behind the lead wraps, and then I'm going to cross over that tag end with about 3 wraps, and then I'll zigzag through this. Don't go parallel with your lead wraps, otherwise your thread just goes in between. And once we get down a couple of those crisscross wraps, I'm just going to pull off that lead tag end, and then we'll build up a slight taper. I'll go over my lead wraps maybe a few more times just to cover them up. We're going to, of course, be covering this with quite a bit of dubbing. The lead wraps also help to hold that brass bead up in the front so it's not in our way. And then I'll advance my thread back to the bend of the hook, almost where the barb would be, and then we'll just go ahead and break off our tag end there. A little trick to that is hold tension with your bobbin hand as you pull up. Otherwise, if you pull up, sometimes your thread will jump halfway up the hook shank, but if you're holding tension with your bobbin hand and as you pull up, it's of course a little bit easier with this 70 denier thread, of course. And so we're going to go ahead and get into our tail here. These are the goose buyouts in black. Now these have a natural taper to them, and so what we're going to do is I'm going to pull off 2 of the larger ones, since this is a size 10. And of course you want to use the buyouts proportionate to the size hook you're doing. I'm going to pull these off, making sure to keep oriented which way it curves, and then I'll stack them on top of each other after I flipped it around. You can see how they're kind of bending apart from each other. That's that natural curve. Some of them will be more curved than others, depending on where on the buyout you, of course, pull these from. We'll do a pinch wrap here. Keeping the tail proportionate to from the lead wraps to the bend is kind of how I do it. We'll make sure they're going straight off with a little bit of a downward angle, and then I'll of course clean these wraps up as I work into that up to that lead wrap where we built up our taper, and then we'll of course just trim these out. So we can see how we've kept the lower section of the body a little bit thinner. I'm going to clean these up now with some tight wraps, go up and down. You don't have to do this. This is just an OCD step that I like to do because we're going to be doing a flash body. If you do something like ribbing is another popular material. I've even seen dubbing, a really tight dub on the body. The options are endless, but for this we're going to be using flash, and so I want that underbody to be nice and uniform so that it makes it a lot easier to lay down a flash body, and that goes for tying nymphs or anything where you want it to be a very uniform body. And when tying a lot of the more classic salmon fly type style flies, I've learned a little bit that it really helps to go down the body and then back up, and that really helps to give you good coverage and also makes it a little bit durable. So I'm going to cut off a good chunk here, and then I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping it with slightly over wrapping wraps. And as we work our way down towards our tail biots, we're just going to make sure we're having even consistency. If you somehow let go of this flash material, no big deal. Just start over again. I'm not pulling too much tension on this, but enough that it's tight and staying in place. And then I'm going to work my way back up. Similar things. I'm just doing slightly overwrapping laps so we have a nice, good coverage. Oftentimes, if you go down one time, sometimes the under thread, which would be black, would show through. In this case, it'd make it be a little bit darker versus if we had a white underbody, for example. But since we did 2 times up and down, where primary focus is on this flashy brown, and I'm going to tie it off and then have that long tag end extending off the back on the top of the hook shank. And I'll explain why in a second, because we're going to pull off another section here of this flash, roughly 8 inches or so, and I'm going to fold it in half and then in half again, and this is going to be our backing. I can't find a flashy thin skin or scud back like this, and so what I'm doing here is I'm basically creating it out of this same flash we used for the body, and we're going to fold it over, like I said, double it over twice, and then I'll apply it and kind of V it over the top of the hook shank and then wrap backwards, making sure you have plenty of material coming off the back end so it's easy to work with, but not so much we're wasting it. And so I've got about 1.5 inches there, and that will work fine. And I want to make sure that it's oriented on the top of the shank. We're going to splay that as we work our way towards the bead. But the first step here is we're going to grab out all of our dubbing from this SLF. I picked it to match the root beer-esque brown tinsel that we're using. I think it's a very good match. It has a little hints of blue, purple in it, which I found very effective for nymphing in some of my local waters. And so we'll go ahead and pull out a good chunk. I'm not going to use all that on this first step, but what we're going to do is build up our thicker body here and our taper, of course, which will splay our legs. So we're going to start with a minimal amount of dubbing. I'm dubbing about 1.5 inches there, and we're going to wrap backwards and then work our way back forward, securing that, and then just kind of give a couple wraps to secure our threads so that we don't have to worry about that dubbing coming undone. And then I'll do the same thing we did for the tail. I'll pull off 2 biots and flip them in reverse so that they're splaying away from each other. Now, I'm going to tie them both in at the same time. However, if it's easier for you to tie one side in, rotate your vise, tie the other side in, you can do that as well, but I'm just going to pinch them in place on the sides, slightly pointing downwards. I'll do about 3 to 4 wraps, make sure they're positioned how I want. If you somehow pull that all the way out or skew it at some weird angle, go ahead and just undo those wraps, tie it in again, and then I'm going to do some nice securing wraps, and I like where that's at, and we'll go ahead and trim those out. Now, this is where it's going to become a little bit interesting. We're going to use these bunch of flash, this tinsel, and I'm going to fold it over, and on this first wrap, I'm going to try and keep them somewhat centered on this hook shank. I'm not going to splay them out, but as we work our way forward, we're going to kind of create a wider body. But definitely, as long as it's wider than our first section, which since we were very minimal, our proportions are going to be right. And so I'll tie it back over itself to kind of create those segments. And that way we're going to get kind of a rigid back, which you find super effective in trying to imitate stonefly nymphs. So advance your thread up about another third so that we have enough to do that same process again, where we're going to apply a little bit more dubbing. So if you did 1.5 inches last time, do 2 inches. If you did a really thin dubbing noodle on there, then do it a little thicker. We're going to brush this out and make it a little more even when we finish the fly, but I'm going to wrap backwards, making sure that that pinches into those legs, and then advance my thread forward and do the same thing. 2-3 wraps right in the front there. Makes it a little bit easier for laying down that stone or those legs. And you can see how that dubbing is kind of coned at this point. And that's going to, if you looked at it from the top profile, splay those legs so they're going out, using the dubbing as our, of course, cushion or back support that's going to push them out and cause them to look like legs. So I'm going to tie them both in, same thing, orient the goose buyout fiber so that they're splaying away from the body. I'm going to position it so it's at a slight down angle. I'm going to shorten it so that they're not quite as long as those first legs, a little bit shorter, but I like to keep my legs a little bit longer. That's just the style I like to tie them. So if you have an issue with one sticking up, we can fix that. Another trick here is if you want to make these buyouts a little bit more durable so they don't come out, just fold them back over and, of course, snip them out. I don't do it on the first one because I don't usually have those come out. You could also use glue, but right here I'm trying to double them back over and build up a little bit more of body. And now when we fold this tinsel over, it's going to be a little bit wider than our first one, but not noticeable, just a little bit wider because we use that little extra dubbing. And if you have an issue with those legs, you can see that one on the top is just a little bit off. We'll go ahead and fix that right here. I pinched it down and I'm wrapping backwards trying to trap those buyouts in the position where I want it. And you can see now it's just perfect. So if you don't get it positioned right, as you do this step here, as you wrap backwards, that's where you can pinch it to the side, wrap a few extra wraps backwards towards the tail, I guess, or the bend of the hook. But you don't want to go all the way, otherwise that defeats the purpose. So same process. This is the third time. By now you're going to be an expert. A little bit more dubbing, but not a ton. You don't want to crowd this little gap here we have between the bead and where we're going to be tying in these buyouts, because you got to remember these buyouts are going to take up some of that space between our dubbing and the bead, but we want to suck our thread down there. We don't want a huge thread collar on this because as you tie in these buyouts, you're going to use 4 to 5 wraps. As you tie in that tinsel, you're going to use another 3 to 6 wraps, and then you got to whip finish. So you got to be mindful. Every wrap matters. And so we're going to orient these, and I got that one's really kind of sticking up at a weird angle. So we're going to see here if my method of wrapping this tinsel over and securing it is going to fix that and have it go where I want it to go. I already know it will, but I just want to let you know what I'm doing. So we're going to fold those buyouts back over, making them nice and secure. Do those thread wraps in front to really trap them. Be very careful at this point not to cut your legs off. Just cut those butt ends of those buyouts, and then we're going to fold the tinsel, and you can see there's that little bit of those buyouts sticking up. I'm going to go ahead and wrap my tinsel over those little butt ends, and then we'll kind of suck our tinsel back in, kind of creating a little bit higher of a hump. So we're utilizing those butt ends or those little pointy fibers, and so make sure as I come up and wrap over that, I'm going to kind of bring my thread over the top of the bead and let it suck back in. And you can see how that created a little bit more of a hump. That's a little trick there to kind of hide your buyout butt ends. You can use that on a lot of different techniques or flies. It's a trick I learned when I can't remember what I was tying, probably a pheasant-tail nymph, and I've incorporated it into a lot of other flies. So something you learn here, apply it to the other flies on where you can use it or it'd be beneficial. Now, the last step here is we're going to, of course, make this really durable. I'm going to take just a 1 drop, maybe even a half a drop of this Loon Thin, because I don't want to create a even back. I want to keep those segmented body that we created using the stepping stones of the dubbing. And so I'm just going to spread that around using the tip. If you don't like using the tip of your resin, you can use your bodkin, and I'm going to spread a little bit into the lower abdomen of this fly just to make it a little bit durable. That's the key here, is we want this to fish. We spent 10-12 minutes on this fly already. We want to make sure that it's durable and it's going to last many fish. And we'll go ahead and cure that up, and it takes about 10-12 seconds. And then the last step is going to be, of course, brushing out that dubbing, and we're going to actually trim it a little bit just to make sure that after this is fished, catch is 10, 20 fish, that we don't have this super long dubbing and have to trim it on the river. And so I'm just going to take those, pull down the most of the fibers and just trim them a little bit shorter. Most of my stoneflies, we do a tighter dubbing here, but this synthetic dubbing really kind of flows, and I like how it appears when it's just a little bit buggy, adding to the underbody there. And you can see that there's the blinging stone. I love this color scheme. You can tie this up using a bunch of different materials, but add them to the box and fish them on your local waters. Thanks for watching. Make sure to click subscribe down below.